Today's session is going to be about continuous security monitoring in DevOps, primarily for large healthcare. I want to take a little bit of time to explain to you who Optum is. How many people in the room other than Kaiser have actually heard of Optum? Oh, I'm impressed. Okay, we're usually pretty low on the radar. So these are stats about the company. Went from Fortune 14 to Fortune 6 last year. Pretty impressive jump. It's really 350 companies under the umbrella of UHG. And I'll bet most of the people in the room didn't know we're also a financial services company. There's Optum Banks. We actually do extradition of employees out of hostile areas around the globe. So there's sort of like a little special ops type of group that gets people that are caregivers out of hostile environments. Pretty interesting line of work there. But primarily we're a payer and insurer and probably the largest employer of physicians around the globe. We have 10,000 people in IT. Just let that sink in for a minute. 10,000 people in IT. And that's just Optum Technology. Our security team is 1,000 people. And that's broken up into a couple groups. We have a cyber defense team, which is an operations team made up of a couple of hundred engineers and architects, man and run our own security operations centers, have a global footprint and presence, and quite frankly, have a massive architecture team, thousands of developers, probably somewhere south of 10,000 applications that are homegrown or COTS, and just possibly the largest enterprise I've ever seen with probably the most complexity that I've seen. And that part of that, I think, has a lot to do with the traditional infrastructure that the enterprise has. And we're definitely in a moment in time that is pivotal for UHG or Optum. Part of that reason is our executive leadership team discovered a few things, right? First is we need to make the leap to a cloud environment. We took advantage of that in the security team and sort of said, well, we spent a year going through Agile and having the product and program teams work through Agile in the enterprise. This DevOps thing is interesting. Could we do it without Agile? Probably not. Could we do Agile without DevOps? Probably, but doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Oddly enough, the majority of the folks that drove the DevOps movement at Optum were the information risk management folks. And that's probably a shocker for folks in the room, but I'll explain to you why that was and sort of how that came about. It's a little bit about me. Pretty humble, so I'm not going to read all this stuff, but I will tell you this about my second year at Optum. I'm in a role that only 2 people out of 225,000 people are in, or 2 out of 10,000 if you look at it that way. There's only 9 people in the program that we're in. It's called the Technology Leadership Career Path. And it basically created a path for people who are technical leaders and senior leaders. I had a team, many Optum people up here, I had a team of 25 from senior director down, and was very focused on security architecture, but the ops of security architecture. This role was really meant to get us out of that and put us into a strategy and innovation group, although we don't live in the in our research and development or innovation team. We're actually scattered throughout the enterprise, through enterprise technology, solutions and technology, and elsewhere. There's 7 principal engineers in the whole company, 2 DEs, and we just hired our first fellow. So it's pretty exciting for us. He came out of IBM, recently from Cisco, but was at IBM as a fellow since 1986. So we have a team that's growing. We're focused on typically a mission that's a little bit different than the rest of the enterprise, bleeding and leading edge. DevOps sort of fits right into that model. And we probably take more risk and assess, more technology than most. Our team will probably grow by 20% within the next few months. So How many people think, so if it was me, it would just be all slides, but I'm sorry. So is this what you think DevOps is for security teams? It isn't, it really isn't. So images are public and, you know, I've given credit to your owners, but it doesn't have to be like this. Basically, we heard about DevOps, the information risk management folks sort of got the word about DevOps. Many of us are Python, Perl, Shell folks. Many of us come from systems and network engineering and storage. And we sort of said, well, how do we get our arms around this before it turns into this? And what we did was we held a JAD session at headquarters in Minnesota. We got 50 technology leaders from the entire enterprise, brought them in and said, we want to lead this as we go to cloud and DevOps. What is it that's broken in the traditional enterprise that we can help address now? I always have looked at the development community as my customer, but it's kind of weird because the other distinguished engineer is in the development community as an architect. So his leadership is sort of my customer, if you will. But we got together and we decided, like many big companies do, we probably need a few proof of concepts. And in these proof of concepts, of course, developers said, we want more control. We want to own it. We want to get to market faster. We want to innovate. We don't want to rely on the traditional infrastructure to get to market with our solutions. No surprise to anybody in this room. The CTO of the most progressive organization that we have, that probably has a couple of thousand developers, stood up in the room, sort of unprecedented, and said, I just want to get there as fast as possible. So to the session that you saw, you know, over the last couple of days, speed kills. I don't necessarily think that's the case with us, but the primary proof of concept that came out of this took us two places. It took us to the public cloud for a single application. These are my terms. One app, one database, no PHI, no PII, and no protected data. We're going to be continuously monitoring that environment. This is a test case for you. We're going to give you accountability. You're going to own it. You're going to be, you are going to be responsible for operating and in some cases serving as like the maven or champion, like to the Walmart way. And they said, yeah, well, bring it. So we said, okay, no problem, and kicked off a proof of concept, carved out a subscription with a cloud service provider, decided right away, we'll take all the PHI and PII, put it somewhere else. It'll be in an enclave. It's going to be heavily fortified, just like we do in the infrastructure. But you know, same teams in the infrastructure will be providing the basically tier 3 monitoring and support. So that being said, we got through this conversation and they said, well, what are our goals? And what I could only get from our development team are primarily the same theme. We want to take some risk. We want to go there very fast. And I said, well, what does very fast mean to you? And our chief cloud security architect is sitting next to me. We sort of came up together, and he said, what are you encouraging here? And I said, just let's see how this plays out. And they said, we want to go so fast that we want to be able to post code through a hub into prod weekly. Now, for us, that was like, we're a conservative traditional enterprise. That was like, you have got to be kidding me. He said, no, we want to do it weekly. I said, what if I tell you that security will be the enabler for your entire efforts to get to DevOps? We're in the first conversation. We will define the requirements with you and partner with you, but you need to look at us differently than you traditionally look at us in the enterprise. We are an equal stakeholder with you in DevOps. If we mess it up, we fix it. If you mess it up, we fix it. And these guys sort of said, okay, we're willing to give that a try. What is it going to look like for us? What's the development process going to look like? So what we did was begin a goals discussion. And these are the goals at a very high level. It's not a big surprise. We want automation, right? We heard about it from Capital One. No one should be touching anything in prod. I'm almost of the belief that no one should be touching anything, okay? Because what we find out is our war rooms, and when things break It's all related to human intervention, once again, accountability, but that's a traditional enterprise, right? Things churn very quickly. They work 99% of the time, but we spend a lot of time trying to fix the things that are broken and find out who's accountable and how to make sure it doesn't happen again. So it's the same, conservative traditional enterprise. We figured that we needed to build an IAM solution, which happened to be for us in the progressive, non-protected data cloud, the place where they could be creative, the Andy Warhols could sort of run around and have a good time. We said, okay, you will MFA into this environment. Oh, okay, that's fine. Is it seamless? Yeah, you'll have something that, an app on your phone you can use. Great. So we know who's there. We tie that back to identity and access management, so we've created a group of roles. And then something very strange happened, something I wasn't expecting. The entire enterprise decided to go off on their own and create a few more POCs. So we were sort of like, well, what are you doing? They said, well, we think we can build a CI/CD pipeline and create new innovation. And who in the room thinks they know what happens when a bunch of engineers decide that they can go do this stuff without goals and executive commitment and sort of buy-in? How many tools do you think we have in that instance? They don't understand, and I'll tell you, this is exactly what happened. Okay? And I've been saying the whole time, I'm like, you know what? Let's port what we did in the traditional enterprise, the stuff we know how to monitor and operate, into a cloud environment, and then build a pipeline with a few tools, maybe some new, some older tools, but we know how to manage it, and you know how to manage it. I didn't want to take, literally 50 tools and forklift them and shove them on development and operations and say, figure it out, because now it's yours. That'd be unfair, right? So that was the initial OMG, it's DevOps. By the way, it was OMG, it's Agile before that. And now it's OMG, this is pretty interesting. So I'm definitely the one screaming it's about the culture. I think that the Optum UHG team would agree. This is a seismic shift for us. Traditional, conservative, Minnesota, not used to this, developers are running the roost. I don't mind. I kind of see it as a really interesting and different partnership that allows us to grow, and we have support, right? So another interesting thing happened as we started to evolve, and that was there became like a slow pile-on. How many people know how many folks we started out with when we scoped this? Just take a guess. 5. 2 lead developers that are brilliant, 20 years in development engineering. I said I'd help them from a security perspective. And then we had some enterprise technology folks that wanted to get involved and sort of learn as we evaluated some tools. And now we're at a point, it's a pivotal crossroad where we need to decide what's going to live, what's not going to stay, what will be improved, who's going to staff it. And to me, other senior leaders in the room may agree, complexity is the killer to everything you do in the enterprise. And I promised everyone who asked me on our executive leadership team, this is not complex, which is the case. Very few tools. This is easy to monitor, the pipeline and the cloud environment. We have gates, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the architecture. If you're technical, you're probably going to dig that. But we're probably in the continuum of DevOps. I'd say we're probably in that continuous delivery, not deployment yet, somewhere between continuous delivery and deployment. So we're evolving. But remember, many of you may have been on this journey for years. We've only been on this journey, for DevOps for probably about 9 months. And this is pretty groundbreaking for us. We move very fast when we want to, and we also move very slowly in a crippled crawl when we don't want to do something. This is the fastest I've ever seen this enterprise move. And security, once again, has been involved since the inception. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about threat ID, containment, and suppression. How many security folks do you have in the room? You know what? It's amazing. That's awesome. Great. So what would we typically do in a traditional enterprise when we want to be able to identify a threat. We have security information event management platforms, network and digital forensics, a very mature incident response process, red and blue teams, that means attack and penetration teams and defense teams that rove the enterprise. And we work very, very closely with them. They're our cyber defense operation. So I started thinking about it. I said, well, you know, I need to help them build this in the cloud so that we could sort of really develop in an agile fashion. I need to make sure that they can do continuous delivery and self-service, but I need to teach them first a little bit more about the tools the security folks are using, why they make sense for the development community, and immediately came up the discussion. Can we do that in Python, or can we do that in PowerShell? And I'm not a developer, but I will say I have an affinity for Python because typically security tools we use are in Py. They all use Python. I said, great, what's an automation tool that we can use? We discussed and determined what that automation tool would be, and then we determined that we would use something even better that was intrinsic to our cloud solution. And then the first demonstration we did for our senior leadership team, who do you think can figure out what that demo was around security that was probably the biggest pain point in the enterprise? Anyone? We automated in Python the build of 2 pairs of virtual firewalls, a unified threat management appliance, and a pair of gateways to remove the bastion host complexity and issues there, and started showing how we could script building those firewalls and doing automated deployment of firewall rules. Who's that mature in your enterprise right now? Right. Interesting. How many people typically wait for a change request or policy exception? You like that? You think I should trust the developers to write their own firewall rules? Sort of an interesting experiment to me. That's the first question that came from our CISO. Who's writing a firewall? I said, okay. So our cyber defense team sort of built a firewall rule infrastructure, kept it very simple. They automated it and scripted it. And now we know what that looks like. It's a really powerful, like 10-minute demo. And after people are done looking at it, they sort of just can't believe what they saw. So for us, very exciting. And it leads a little bit to what the pipeline looks like for us. So remember I told you we don't use a lot of tools in this environment? One thing our VP of Cyber Defense had said to me, promise that you don't dump everything in DevOps on us. We can't be the intake of everything that goes on in this environment. I said, it's fair. We'll have champions, we'll be tier 3 support. It's turned out, blessed, that the developers are actually that. And we have the traditional syslog and flow-based telemetry in the environment that we do send up to cyber defense, and it'll continue to be monitored from that environment. But one of the things we ideated around and determined was we were going to create sandboxes with gates for the developers. And that leads me to something that I think is very simple, but actually really works well for us. Much like a stoplight approach, we created a green, a yellow, and a red tier, which are basically all a sandbox for development. And they promote code through that environment. The gates are tied to the network security of the infrastructure. Remember I was talking about the cloud environment? And we can push them back or forward at will. Folks have very well-defined roles. And believe it or not, there's active vulnerability assessment and penetration testing in a certain tier. There's block code signing in a certain tier. And there's a CVE port directly, or critical vulnerability and exploit port directly from MITRE in this environment that MITRE manages US CERT to our cyber defense team. So all of that has been automated, and we will begin to start dropping tools into this tiered environment, and then moving tools out that we don't like or aren't working well for us. But this is all an effort to see just how fast they can go before somebody hurts themselves. And we hope that we call breaking glass something a little bit different. When we sat with the CTO of this division, we said, let's stir things up a little bit and try something new. That's what we thought breaking glass was. And then I learned from Topo, breaking glass was really, things have gone very bad. We need to actually back out of this environment. We built that natively into our tiers and gates in our solution. So what I'm saying to you is the traditional security controls that we use in the enterprise, the traditional tools that we use in the enterprise. Those reported, in some way scripted, to create the environment for the pipeline to run in. And oddly enough, the security folks had more of an affinity for the automation tools and scripting than they did for the security tools. And I think that's still the case. And then we found some developers that definitely, and I apologize, this image isn't super clear, but another thing that Topo said that really resonated to me, we are at the point where we're trying to figure out how to govern this environment and determine what the patterns are that we can look to, and then the outliers for those patterns, so that we can create an environment that's, we can duplicate, sort of over and over and over again as these efforts grow, and have that solution automation or an architectural automation and continuous monitoring that gets us to a place where we build a very secure enclave for the protected data. So I think I made it through. I have 4 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? Really excited that we actually got to questions. Everybody's just really quiet in the room. Go ahead.
More details on what technologies used what technologies used to build the pipeline? Like, what's the pipeline automation tools look like? The infrastructure automation tools?
I can't talk about that.
Oh.
But I will tell you that they are the same tools that you have heard over and over and over again here. The same automation tools. Everything is driven by scripting in our environment. People don't really touch anything other than to kick off scripts, and that will change, where they won't touch those at all, because they still think that could break things. And the who's who of vendors generally, from a security perspective, around firewall, intrusion prevention, app visibility and control, containment, syslog monitoring, traditional flow-based telemetry. And there's nothing I wanted to do more than get into the vendors and tools, as well as the architecture, the actual architecture. But I was asked and promised that I would not.
Okay.
No other questions? Wow, we finished early. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.